Class, what I'm working on today is using quadratic formula to solve equations, and the key is they have to be set equal to 0. This is very important. Remember, we always set the equation equal to 0 if we have an x squared. Notice that little 2 right there, and then the x to the first. And in each of these equations, you'll notice an x squared, an x squared, and x squared. You can use a quadratic formula when x squared or a form of it is the highest exponent. Okay, so when it's an x to the third or an x to the fourth, you can't use the quadratic formula. Remember, quadratic means degree 2. All right, so now that we've got that situated, we're gonna go through the steps. Okay, so pardon me here. Let me just get this highlighted here. Step 1. Always in step 1, even however you do these problems, you have to identify the a, the b, and the c, which the a is the coefficient for x squared, the b is the coefficient for x, and the c is the constant term. So when I look at this, I say a equals a positive 6, b equals a negative 1, c equals 2. Okay? And then I use the formula. The formula says that x equals negative b, and notice I put it in parentheses, plus or minus the square root of the b, all squared. Notice I put that in parentheses, minus 4 times a times c. And remember, the square root goes over the 4 times a times c. So remember to extend your square root over this entire part. Don't leave anything out. And you're going to divide the entire part in the top by 2 times the a. Okay, so you set it up. That's good. And if you set this up, at least you have the correct form. Then you're supposed to use a calculator or your mind. I'll go through my mind and I'll say the negative of a negative is a positive. So I say positive 1. The plus and minus stays the same. Doesn't change. There's a square root. I will do negative 1 squared. For those of you who remember this, negative 1 times negative 1 equals positive 1. So in my mind, I'm thinking this is positive 1, minus 4 times 6, which is 24, times 2, which is 48. So I have a 1 minus 48, which creates a negative 47. All divided by 2 times 6. 2 times 6 is the number 12, so I'm going to write down 12. Now, you're not done here. You're supposed to put your calculator in what I call complex number form. And you have to use the mode button to get a plus bi form. You have to look for that. And then when you take the square root of negative 47 on the calculator, it will tell you it is it'll tell you I times this crazy decimal. Okay, it's going to get this crazy number. When you get that, that tells you what we really should write is I times the square root of 47. So let's look at this, and please understand this truth. When there is a negative sign inside the square root, it creates the number I. And I talked about this a little bit in class, that I comes from it's a point in a two-dimensional space. So it's a number moving up and down in two-dimensional space. So we call it I times the square root of 47. And you will say x equals 1 plus or minus I times the square root of 47 all over 12. Now, there is one additional step for level 4 people, okay? So this gets us to level 3. But if for those of you going for the level 4, you have to check the factors of 47. You will find out that 47 is a prime number. The only whole numbers that multiply to 47 are 1 times 47. And so since it's the square root of a prime number, we're done. There's nothing to break down here, so you leave it here. So now this level 3 problem has just become a level 4 problem, because this is the best we can do. The secondary best you could write is this. Sometimes they write it like this. X equals 1 over 12 plus or minus I times the square root of 47 all divided by 12. And we usually keep the I part. Let me erase this a little bit here. We put the I on the outside. Okay, so let me try to be a little clear here. The way you want to write it is I times the square root of 47, that's a 47, divided by 12. But I don't mind this method. I don't mind you writing it like this. You have indicated to me that there are 2 answers. Now, that's a good point. So how many solutions are there? Well, when there's a plus and minus, that means the number of solutions is 2. and the type of solutions is two imaginary numbers. Okay, so let's keep that in mind. That took care of the most complex case. Now let me talk about the easier cases. Easier cases are easier because there's less of them. So you can still do the same thing and say A equals 6, but this time you have to say C equals 2 and B equals 0. I want to make a little highlight on that because if you notice here, there's no X term, so there's really a 0 for the B. So you do the exact same thing you did before, but guess what happens? You get negative 0 plus or minus the square root of 0 squared minus 4 times 6 times 2. Remember to extend the square root all over 2 times 6. So a lot of nice things happen in a two-term like this where b equals 0 because the negative of 0 is 0. I'm not even going to write that. Plus or minus, that's all I'm going to write down. 0 squared is 0. I don't need to write that. Minus 4 times 6 times 2. This is times 2. 24 times 2 is a negative 48 all over 12. And so now, when I talk to you about the square root of a negative, you get to write I. So you get to say x equals plus or minus I times the square root of 48 over 12. And we've just hit level 3 again. And so this would, you got an answer. But for those of you going to level 4, you have to break down the 48 and you have to tell yourself, what times what is 48? Well, there's a lot of things. I'm going to go with 8 times 6. And then what is 8? It's 2 times 4. And what is 2? It's 2 times 2. And what is 6? It's 2 times 3. There's a lot of things you have to break down here. Now, when you get really good at this, you have to remember that everything here is a square root. So I need 2 of these square roots here, and I need 2 of these because they're identical, and this makes the number 2 times the number 2, but this square root of 3 is what I call a singleton, and you get the square root of 3. What does that all equal? It equals 4 times the square root of 3. And so for those of you on level 4, you're going to write x equals plus or minus 4i. Now we usually put the I in front of the 4 times the square root of 3, all divided by 12. And what's really cool about that at level 4 is 4 goes into 12 3 times, right? So this is 1 times I times the square root of 3. So x equals I times the square root of 3 over 3. And this is what we call a level 4 answer because the numbers were reduced and everything looks smaller. And this is a level 3 answer where we have an answer, but the numbers are big and they're not reduced. Okay, but either way, this is a faster problem because you were putting in zeros in the beginning. All right, let's go to the fastest one. You can still use the quadratic formula on something super quick. The only thing you need to understand is A equals 6, B equals 0, C equals 0. So when you go to the formula, you go x equals negative 0 plus or minus the square root of 0 squared minus 4 times 6 times 0, all divided by 2 times 6. Now, wait a minute. This is crazy. Why are we going through so much math for this? Well, I'm going to show you why. Because this becomes 0. This becomes 0. This becomes 0. And this becomes 12. What the heck? We got a whole bunch of zeros on the top. Oh, my goodness. This is x equals 0 over 12. Wait a minute. X equals 0. Oh, we should have known that. We should have known 0 squared times 6 equals 0. But we didn't know that yet, did we? So this problem is very easy. The answer here is 0. And what you write down is you say, because of the effect of plus and minus, you say the number of solutions is 1, and the type is 1 real. And look at the difference here. Look at the other one. This one we had the I, so that was an imaginary numbers, and there was a plus and a minus, which means there were 2 solutions. Well, when you get the pure number 0, it's a single number, so there's only one answer, and of course 0 is a real number, so you say 1 real. And that's how you kind of answer that for the most part. I didn't really talk about this part down here, but I should have, and I'm going to add that little part here. Remember that the number, and I see I made a boo-boo. The number here is a plus and a minus. Okay, so the number of solutions is 2, and the types is 2 imaginary. And in this situation, you always got to keep track of that plus and minus, creating two solutions. And you always have to keep track that when you see the I, it makes it an imaginary number, not a real number. So that's how we would answer the middle one. Okay? So anyways, I hope it all helped out. Rewind the video and double check everything. And thanks for watching.